Chapter 16. Holocaust and Statehood. History of Israel, the winter of 1945, hung heavy over Europe. The war was ending, yet silence carried its own horror. In the forests of Poland, snow still covered the ruins of villages once alive with children's laughter. In Germany, Allied soldiers walked through the gates of Dachau and Bergen-Belsen, their boots sinking into the mud of camps where skeletal figures' eyes wide with disbeliefs daggered toward them. A soldier later recalled, "We didn't liberate them. They liberated us from ignorance." The air was thick with the stench of death, the collapse of an entire civilization's moral order. For the Jewish people, there was no triumphant homecoming. 6 million had been exterminated: mothers, fathers, rabbis, poets, tailors, doctors, and children who never had the chance to dream. Survivors carried not only tattooed numbers on their arms, but also the unbearable weight of memory. Europe, once a vibrant center of Jewish life, was now a graveyard. Yet, even as the ashes of Auschwitz blew across the continent, a new chapter was struggling to be born. Out of the worst catastrophe in Jewish history came the urgent, unstoppable drive towards statehood. The question was no longer abstract. Could the Jews survive without a homeland of their own? No Nazi persecution and the Holocaust? The Holocaust did not erupt overnight. It grew like a cancer from the soil of centuries of anti-Semitism in Europe. Adolf Hitler, rising to power in 1933, made the Jew the embodiment of Germany's humiliation after World War I. His speeches dripped with venom, depicting Jews as both parasites and conspirators. In 1935, the Nuremberg laws stripped German Jews of citizenship, forbade intermarriage, and reduced them to outcasts in the land they had called home for centuries. Jewish shop windows were shattered on Kristallnacht in November 1938. When synagogues burned while firefighters stood idly by, broken glass crunched underfoot as Jewish families huddled in fear. For some, this was the moment they understood. There would be no safety left in Europe, yet emigration was difficult. Few countries would take in Jews in significant numbers. British-controlled Palestine was restricted by quotas. When war began in 1939, persecution turned into annihilation. The invasion of Poland brought nearly 3 million Jews under Nazi control. Ghettos were walled off in Warsaw and Vilna. Starvation was deliberate. Policy ration cards allowed Jews only a fraction of the food Germans received. In one diary, a child wrote of watching his younger brother die after trading a family heirloom for a crust of bread. Then, in 1941, as Nazi armies stormed into the Soviet Union, the policy escalated. The Einsatzgruppen, mobile killing units, followed the Wehrmacht, shooting Jews by the tens of thousands in ravines and forests. At Babi Yar near Kyiv, 33,000 Jews were executed in just 2 days. Survivors remembered the earth moving for days afterward as the mass graves settled. By 1942, the final solution had been devised at the Wannsee Conference. Deportations by cattle cars brought millions to extermination camps. Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec, Majdanek, Chelmno. At Auschwitz-Birkenau, the chimneys belched smoke day and night. Families arrived, clutching children, unaware that selections on the ramp meant immediate death for most. Zyklon B gas hissed through vents, silencing voices within minutes. The smell of burning flesh spread across the countryside. The scale of destruction was almost beyond comprehension. Out of Europe's pre-war Jewish population of 9 million, 2/3 were murdered. Communities that had thrived for centuries, polished shtetls, German intellectual circles, Lithuanian yeshivas were wiped off the map. And yet, amid despair, there were sparks of resistance. In April 1943, the Jews of the Warsaw Ghetto rose up with smuggled pistols and homemade bombs. For nearly a month, they defied the Nazi war machine, choosing to die fighting rather than be led like cattle. Their courage reverberated across Jewish memory, a testament to dignity in the face of annihilation. The refugee crisis after World War II, when the war ended in May 1945, liberation brought little solace. Survivors emerged from the camps weighing barely 80 pounds, their faces hollowed, their families gone. Some tried to return to their hometowns, only to be met with hostility. In Kielce, Poland, a pogrom in 1946 killed 42 returning Jews, proving that anti-Semitism had not died with Hitler. For many survivors, Europe was no longer home, but a vast graveyard. Displaced persons DP camps sprang up in Germany, Austria, and Italy. These were grim places, barbed wire, overcrowding, and despair. Yet within them, Jewish life stubbornly rekindled. Schools were organized, theaters performed Yiddish plays, rabbis officiated weddings. Babies were born the first generation after the Holocaust, symbolizing defiance. The question burned: where could they go? The United States, though sympathetic, maintained immigration quotas. Britain, still controlling Palestine, restricted Jewish immigration under pressure from Arab leaders who opposed the creation of a Jewish majority. The 1939 White Paper had set a limit of 75,000 Jewish immigrants over 5 years, a ceiling reached during the war. For survivors, these restrictions felt like a second betrayal. Zionist organizations took the lead, smuggling Jews into Palestine aboard rickety ships. One such vessel, the Exodus 1947, carried over 4,500 Holocaust survivors but was intercepted by the British Navy. Images of emaciated survivors being forced back to Europe shocked the world and turned public opinion against Britain. American President Harry Truman pressed Britain to allow 100,000 Jewish refugees into Palestine. But the British, weary from war and fearing unrest in the Middle East, resisted. Violence in Palestine escalated, with Jewish underground groups like the Haganah and Irgun launching attacks on British targets. The refugee crisis had become inseparable from the question of Jewish statehood. The UN partition plan by 1947, Britain admitted defeat. Unable to reconcile Jewish and Arab claims, it turned the problem over to the newly formed United Nations Special Committee on SCOP, toured Palestine, listening to testimonies from Jews and Arabs alike. Survivors of the camps, speaking before the committee, moved many delegates to tears. On November 29, 1947, the UN General Assembly voted on Resolution 181. The Partition Plan. It proposed dividing Palestine into 2 states, one Jewish, one Arab, with Jerusalem under international administration. In the hall, Jewish delegates wept with joy as the tally reached the necessary 2/3 majority. For the first time in 2 millennia, international legitimacy was given to a Jewish state. The Arab leadership, however, rejected the plan outright. To them, it was an injustice. Why should Palestinians lose their land because Europeans had committed crimes against the Jews? Riots broke out, and violence between Jewish and Arab communities intensified. Yet for Jews, particularly Holocaust survivors, the vote was a lifeline. Golda Meir later recalled, "After we lost 6 million people, we could not afford to lose this opportunity." The dream of statehood, cherished since the days of Herzl and nurtured through decades of struggle, was now within reach. Declaration of the State of Israel, 1948. On May 14, 1948, in Tel Aviv, David Ben-Gurion stood before a crowded hall, his hair disheveled, his voice steady. The British mandate was ending at midnight. At 4:00 p.m., he read aloud the Declaration of Independence. "We hereby declare the establishment of a Jewish state in Eretz Israel, act to be known as the State of Israel." The room erupted in applause, tears, and song. Outside, crowds danced in the streets, waving flags, embracing strangers. For a people who had walked through the valley of death, this was resurrection. Survivors who had staggered out of Auschwitz 3 years earlier now saw a nation reborn, yet celebration was shadowed by the looming storm. Even as the declaration was signed, Arab armies from Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and Iraq prepared to invade. The following day, war erupted, the first Arab-Israeli war. The newborn state faced annihilation from the moment of its birth. But the symbolism of that day cannot be overstated. For Jews across the world, May 14th was redemption. The Holocaust had proven that assimilation offered no guarantee of survival. Only sovereignty, they believed, could ensure safety. The Holocaust and the creation of Israel are inseparable in modern history. The Holocaust destroyed the illusion that Jews could rely on the goodwill of host nations. Centuries of diaspora life had culminated in catastrophe. Statehood was no longer a matter of aspiration but of survival. The refugee crisis after 1945 underscored this reality. With doors closed in Europe and America, the world witnessed displaced survivors wandering with nowhere to go. Palestine became not merely a choice, but the only viable refuge. For Arabs, however, the partition plan was an injustice imposed by foreign powers at their expense. Their rejection reflected both national pride and fear of displacement. This clash of narratives, Jewish survival versus Arab dispossession, would ignite decades of conflict. The Declaration of Israel in 1948 marked a turning point not only for Jews but for the entire Middle East. It transformed the Jewish people from victims of history to actors shaping their destiny. But it also set the stage for one of the most intractable conflicts of the modern era. From the ashes of Auschwitz rose the State of Israel, a rebirth so improbable it seemed almost biblical. The same trains that had once carried Jews to death camps were now carrying them to Haifa and Tel Aviv, where they stepped onto the soil of a homeland reborn. The world had witnessed both the darkest night and the dawning of a new day. History rarely grants neat resolutions. For the Jewish people, 1948 was not an end, but a beginning forged in fire, shadowed by tragedy, yet illuminated by hope.